Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a topic that hits home for so many people. You know, whether you're just starting with English or maybe feeling a bit stuck, like you've hit a plateau with fluency.
Right, that plateau is really common.
Exactly. And what makes this deep dive interesting, I think, is the source material. It promises something pretty different from the usual advice. It talks about 5 powerful steps that will apparently completely change how you learn English.
Yeah, it's aimed at smart learners, it says, to get real fluency, not just textbook stuff.
And the really compelling part, maybe a bit controversial, is this promise of getting fluent without living in an English-speaking country or, spending years buried in grammar books.
Which definitely goes against what most people assume.
Totally. So our mission today is to really unpack these ideas, understand not just what the steps are, but why they work and how they challenge those typical learning methods. Okay, let's unpack this.
It's a really interesting way to reframe it all. The source kind of shifts away from language being just, facts to memorize and treats it more like a skill you actually develop through practice, active practice. It's less about just input, more about actually, retraining your brain, which I find fascinating.
I totally agree. And that first step it mentions, it feels like maybe the biggest mental shift. Surprisingly simple, but often overlooked, I think. It's about training yourself to
Think in English.
Exactly. Think in English. The source calls it the biggest shift.
Yeah.
And, when you think about how most of us learn, we hear English, right? Then, boom, translate it back to our own language. Think of a reply there. Then translate that back into English before we even speak.
It's like having, Google Translate in your head, as the source puts it. It's this constant back and forth.
A total mental bottleneck.
And that bottleneck, that's precisely what kills fluency. Real conversation is just too fast for that double translation.
Right. No time.
Fluency is about being immediate, like a direct line from thought to speaking. So the core idea here is just break that loop. Train your brain to actually stay in English.
Okay, but how? That sounds hard.
Well, it's not about tackling complex philosophy right away. The advice is actually pretty down to earth. Start small. Just, narrate your day inside your head in English.
Like what? Give me an example.
Oh, simple things. The sky is really clear today. Or, I'm feeling a bit tired. Or even just the kettle's boiling. Simple observations.
Okay.
But the act of forming those thoughts directly in English, even silently, that's the foundation. The source makes a really powerful point. Once you stop translating, everything gets faster.
Huh. So thinking, something we do all the time anyway, becomes active practice.
Exactly. It flips it from passive to active.
But it must feel awkward at first, right? Like forcing your brain into a new gear.
Oh, totally. That awkwardness is normal. It's actually a sign your brain's working, building new pathways. The key is just persistence and keeping it simple initially.
Right. Don't try to think about quantum physics on day one.
Definitely not. Just describe your surroundings, your actions, what you're feeling right now. The simplicity doesn't matter as much as the consistency. Building that habit, that's where the speed and, the natural feel of fluent conversation starts to come from. It frees up so much mental energy.
That makes a lot of sense, clearing out that mental traffic jam. So, okay, you start thinking in English internally. What's the next step then?
Yeah.
How do you get those thoughts out sounding?
Well, good. The source has a pretty active strategy for this, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Moving from the internal to the external. The next strategy is something the source calls transformative.
Shadowing.
Shadowing. Okay, I can picture that. The source has this great analogy, right? Imagine you're watching a movie and you repeat exactly what the actor says. Same words, same speed, same emotion.
Yeah, that's shadowing.
It really nails it, doesn't it? You're not just repeating words. You're stealing fluency like an actor. That's a cool phrase.
It is. And the why behind it is super important. It's not just mimicry. Shadowing actually trains your mouth, your muscles, and your brain to, well, move like a native speaker.
Move like a native speaker.
Yeah. Think about the actual physical act of speaking.
Yeah.
The muscle memory, the rhythm, the intonation, where the stress falls, all that stuff that makes English sound like English.
Yeah.
When you shadow, you're physically practicing those exact movements, those sounds. And crucially, the emotional tone. It's like a whole body learning thing.
So how do you do it practically?
The advice is pretty clear. Take a short clip, maybe 10 to 30 seconds, listen really carefully, pause it, then mimic the line exactly.
Including the emotion.
Yeah.
That's the bit I found really interesting. Not just the words, but how they say it.
Precisely. If the actor sounds surprised, you try to sound surprised. If they whisper, you whisper back. It's about performing it, not just saying the words.
Okay. Performing.
Yeah. And this forces you to notice all those little details, pronunciation, stress, the melody of the sentence, things a grammar book just can't teach you. You start to internalize the flow, the natural pauses, the emphasis that makes English sound, alive, not robotic.
Right. So it's less analytical, more doing?
Exactly. It bypasses some of that slow analytical thinking that can bog people down. You're learning by imitating mastery directly. It's a shortcut to getting that natural rhythm.
That makes total sense. It makes pronunciation feel less like rules and more like, well, movement. Okay, so speaking of sounding natural, the source points out a really common mistake people make, right? Something about how we put sentences together.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one. I see it all the time. People spend ages memorizing lists of single words.
Right, like vocabulary lists.
Exactly. And they kind of hope these words will just magically fit together into fluent sentences. But the source is really clear. Fluent speakers don't operate like that. They speak in phrases.
Phrases, not just words. It's like trying to build a Lego model just by looking at individual bricks without the instructions showing how they connect.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah. If you only collect words, you miss the actual structure, the common patterns of the language. The source says, think of phrases like tools. Things you can just grab and use without having to build them from scratch every time.
Tools you can grab. I like that.
Yeah. And they're not random words stuck together. They're these chunks that native speakers use all the time, automatically, like pre-made bits of language.
Got examples?
Sure. The source gives really common ones, like, I'm not sure yet, or that makes sense, or even, you gotta be kidding me.
Ah, okay. Things you hear constantly.
Exactly. And when you start using these, your English instantly sounds more fluent. Even if your total vocabulary isn't huge yet, it's about sounding natural.
That feels like a real shortcut to confidence then. Because you're not trying to invent every sentence from zero.
Totally. You have these ready-made expressions.
But how do you, find these phrases? Just listen loads. Or is there a more active way?
Well, it's a mix. Listening is key, obviously. Pay attention to how people actually talk in conversations, maybe not just formal writing, but then be active. When you hear a phrase that seems useful, don't just understand it. Write it down.
Like keep a phrase book, not just a word list.
Exactly. The source suggests that. And then, this is crucial, use them. Actively try to slot them into your own speaking or writing, ideally soon after you learn them, like within 24 hours.
Okay, use it or lose it, basically.
Pretty much. That active use makes them stick, makes them your tools. And when you use them, you sound more natural, which builds your confidence and it helps you keep up in conversations without constantly pausing to think about grammar or the next word. It just frees up your brain.
Okay, does that make sense? Now, this next bit of advice, honestly, this sounds like the hardest one for a lot of people. Especially perfectionists, maybe? It's called speak ugly, speak often.
Yeah, that one is definitely challenging. It kind of goes against everything we're usually taught about learning, right? Like, get it perfect before you show anyone.
Right. Don't make mistakes in public.
But the rule here, the source, is super direct. You have to speak before you feel ready. That's the core message. Most learners get caught in this trap of waiting until they think they can speak perfectly, or at least, without embarrassing themselves.
But that moment never really comes, does it?
Exactly what the source says. That moment never comes. It's a total trap.
It paralyzes you. You get stuck in your head, scared of messing up, and then you never actually practice the main skill speaking.
Yeah.
How do you push past that fear?
Well, the source uses another great analogy here. It compares it to learning guitar.
Okay.
You don't wait until you magically know how to play perfectly before you actually pick up the guitar, right? You just start playing. Badly at first, usually.
Very badly, in my case.
Haha.
Yeah.
But you get better through playing, through making those awkward sounds. It's the same with language. Every single time you actually open your mouth and try to speak English, even if the grammar is wonky, or you forget words, or your pronunciation feels weird, you are actively training your brain and your mouth. You're building those connections. You're practicing the skill.
So it's about embracing the messiness. Like the mistakes are part of the process, not failures.
Absolutely. That's the key insight. The source puts it bluntly. The only way to speak well is to speak a lot, even if it's messy, especially when it's messy.
Wow.
It's just a fundamental truth about learning any skill, really. You learn by doing. And the first attempts are rarely smooth. But every try, even the messy ones, gives you feedback, strengthens those pathways. It's a powerful call to just start talking. Don't let fear stop you from getting the practice you absolutely need.
That feels really liberating, actually. It changes what progress even means. It's not about perfection, it's about participation. And that leads us nicely into the final strategy, which the source says is something most people never do. But it's really transformative. It's called go deep, not wide.
Right. And this one tackles a really common misunderstanding about fluency. Lots of people think fluency just means knowing tons and tons of words, like 10,000, 20,000 words.
Which sounds incredibly daunting. Like, how do you even learn that many?
Exactly. But the source totally reframes fluency. It says, fluency isn't about knowing 10,000 words. It's about knowing 1,000 words really well and using them in real situations.
Okay, 1,000 sounds way more manageable than 10,000. That's a huge relief. But what does knowing them really well actually mean? It's more than just recognizing them, I guess.
Oh, much more. It's about moving from just passively recognizing a word when you read or hear it to being able to actively, automatically use it yourself without thinking too hard.
Got it. Active use.
Yeah. And the practical advice is basically stop trying to learn every single new word you come across every day. That just leads to shallow knowledge. Instead, pick a small group, maybe just 5 or 10 words at a time, and really go deep with them.
Dude, how do you do that?
It means really engaging with those few words in lots of different ways. So make sentences with them. Listen out for them specifically when you're watching or reading something. Try to use them yourself in conversations like we talked about with phrases. And importantly, say them out loud. A lot.
Okay.
The goal is to really make them part of your English, to own them, so they just pop out when you need them, naturally.
So it's not just recognizing them, it's like internalizing them until they're automatic tools you can just grab. That must make conversations flow much better.
Exactly. The source has another great analogy for this one. Think of fluency like swimming.
Okay.
You don't need to touch every part of the pool. You just need to know how to stay afloat confidently with what you've got.
Ah, I like that. Functional mastery.
Precisely. It's about being effective with the tools you have, not about having an encyclopedic knowledge you can't actually use smoothly. When you go deep, those core words become automatic. It allows for confident communication instead of that constant feeling of searching for words or translating. It's just much more efficient learning. Avoids that jack of all trades, master of none problem.
Wow. Okay, this whole deep dive has really giving us a completely different way to think about getting fluent in English.
Mm.
The source makes it so clear, doesn't it? It's not really about perfect grammar, definitely not just about tests.
No.
It's about actually functioning in English thinking, reacting, and expressing yourself without fear, moving beyond just like knowing about the language to actually using it competently.
And what's really neat is how these 5 steps sort of, link together. They build on each other to create this whole approach that feels surprisingly logical when you lay it out.
Right. You start with that core internal change. Start thinking in English.
Then you add the active physical practice, shadow native speakers like an actor.
Then build up your conversational toolkit with those ready-to-go chunks. Collect and use real natural phrases.
And crucially, get over the fear and just do it. Speak even if it's ugly.
And finally, focus your learning for real usability. Go deep with a few words instead of wide with too many.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, if you zoom out a bit, these aren't just tips for language learning, are they?
What do you mean?
Well, they represent a kind of philosophy for learning almost any skill, I think. This idea of active engagement, embracing the messy middle part, focusing your practice deeply, applying things immediately.
Yeah, I see that.
The source hints that when you apply these kinds of actions consistently, not just for English, but for anything, that's when things start to feel automatic, natural, fluent. It's not just about English. It's about how we actually achieve mastery.
So it makes you wonder.
Exactly. It raises that question. What other areas of your life maybe could benefit from this kind of approach? Focusing on active practice and real depth instead of just passively consuming information or spreading yourself too thin.
That is a really powerful thought to end on. It puts these strategies, which might seem a bit counterintuitive at first, into a much bigger context. So if you listening have been, struggling with English or maybe any skill that feels just out of reach, these ideas from our deep dive today, they seem absolutely worth trying. Stop waiting for perfection, maybe start doing, even if it's messy, and get ready to actually function in English.
Yeah.
Maybe beyond. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.